Coffee. It's so nice to have you among us. You represent someone that we haven't had before, someone who works with the young folks in our community. And I would you say that most of your students are local or are they from all over the country?
All over the country, really. So a number of students, that are Midwest from, Milwaukee, I'm sorry, Minnesota, Chicago area, and also a lot of people from the East Coast. So I'd say a range of people here.
So you have a wide variety. And they're mostly what, about 20 years old?
Um, I would say because I'm teaching advanced undergrads, yeah, 20, 21, 22. Sometimes I have some older students, but yeah, mostly the I would say probably 95% would be sort of traditional undergrad age.
And I have one other question for you about your student population, and that is, in your classes, do you ever see women like us who decide to get a degree later?
Um, I have not. I see a number of auditors, which
Mhm.
is kind of a nice way to, learn without having to take the exams and do all of that. Um, but when I was an undergrad here years ago, we used to have more special students, and sort of non-traditional students. But I think it's pretty hard right now for that population to get into a degree seeking program at the
Yeah,
UW, or at least, yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that we see fewer people that are not, traditional.
Mhm. Well, Patty, I met you a number of years ago, I think at a simulation that Just Dane did for your classes. And I'd like you to talk about why you do a simulation. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, it is part of Just Dane's reentry program. And it is to educate essentially the public about what it's like for people coming out of recent incarceration to reintegrate into the community. And Just Dane offers a number of services for that. But this is an hour-long presentation to begin with that is divided into four different 15-minute sections. And in those sections, the students who role play, they're given quite a bit of information about the individual, they're role playing, they are responsible for going throughout the community to find housing, to find jobs, to find medicine, to find clothing, to find everything that somebody needs coming out of prison. And the difficulty, the standing in line, the bus trips, giving them what it's like that first month, after which they're homeless because the Department of Corrections does halfway houses for 30, some 60 days until they're out. And many of them have no place to go and no one to know. So, Patty, tell us how that works for you. Oh, by the way, we also then at the end have a panel of previously incarcerated people that talk about how they got to where they are now. So, yeah. So, Patty, tell us why you chose that.
I first attended as a volunteer when it was still Madison Urban Ministry before they rebranded to Just Dane, an event at Edgewood College.
Mhm.
And I just saw it come through some, maybe email or something like that. And I thought, oh, that'd be kind of interesting to see what they're doing over there. And then when I volunteered there as part of, like you do, and as one of the, people, I was at I think the Salvation Army desk. I thought this would be great for my students. And so then I came to my department and asked our alumni board, which supports these kinds of activities, basically for support with the department support it. We tried it once. It was very, very popular with students. I pulled together, a presentation for our alumni board, and they've funded it ever since. So that's been a number of years, over 10, I think, that we've been able to have that. And so, and each semester, my class size has increased, like all of our class sizes are increasing here. I think I used to have about 100 students. Now I'm up to 190. And so I probably have, now about 150 students attending each semester, and they find it really powerful. I think that we have them do a reflection on the experience. I do give them extra credit. It's 3 hours outside of class time. And I also want them to come. And so many of them will say, in their reflection, oh, I'm so busy, but I came because it's, I needed the extra credit, or it felt like a lot of extra credit points, and I'm so glad I did come. And so um, they really, I think, just go through they get an identity, and they go through sort of this, process of trying to accomplish things that people try to accomplish when they're re-entering. And it's, I think, really eye-opening for them. And I think for most of us that work in this field at all with people re-entering, you think, how hard would it be to get people IDs before they left prison? What about medical cards? What about appointments where they could actually, see a doctor to, make sure that they were getting their medication, those kinds of things. And just sort of the bureaucracy that people face and the inconvenient ways they try to access things, the lack of housing, the lack of money, lack of support, all of those things, I think is just really powerful for students to see. In many ways, the concrete things we could do to make things better. And then for the panel, most people have never, interacted or heard directly from somebody who's been incarcerated. I might show videos in class, those kinds of things. It's very different and very humanizing for them to see people in person. So I've had lots of quotes that are similar to, this is the most powerful experience I've had during my entire undergraduate career. Um, and so it's been really consistently something people find really incredibly meaningful. And we are also then supporting a community organization that's helping people re-enter, thanks to our alumni board's generosity with that. They've been really very, very supportive of that. And yeah, so I think I'll keep doing it as long as I possibly can. So
That's great. I participate, as you know, in a number of the simulations myself. And I will use an example of one we recently did, which was to the UW Credit Union. People who deal with people who want checking accounts, who want mortgages, who want, and they were exposed to this vulnerable population. Some folks who haven't been, in public, who haven't been out for 30 years, who have no idea what it means to have a credit report, what it means to have no credit. We had a woman who had been incarcerated talk about she had never written a check, and now she's out and she's in the world. And so I guess the vulnerability of these people is crushing. And they are still being punished long after they're out of prison because they're all on parole. Uh, they have to show up at parole offices, some once a week, sometimes once a month, some 3 times a week. It just depends on on how they were sentenced. So the idea of creating an environment that supports these people is so important. Patty, I know one of the last simulations to your group was a man who had been a professional football player. Do you remember this? And
yes, I do.
yes, exactly. And he swept up with his professionalism, invited to parties with lots of famous people, being very impressed with it, handed a golden spoon and watching people sniff cocaine. He had no idea what cocaine was, and they just did what everybody else was doing. And it was beginning of the end for him. He was in for a long time, and he talks about how dehumanizing his life in prison was. And Patty, that's your area, as a psychologist. Prison here in the United States is punishment, and it is dehumanizing. And Wisconsin has greater mass incarceration than most all states here in the United States. It's unbelievable because it's business, and it's business that doesn't recognize the destruction that's happening to the people who are involved and their families. Um, so important to understand that. So, Patty, what are these kids like? I know that a number of them who've attended simulations go on to become interns at some of the nonprofits in town. Some of them stay in town and work. So, tell us about your student population.
Yeah, well, I teach this class that's now 190 people, which is basically a psychology of issues related to crime. And then I teach a 25-person capstone, which is called Issues in Prisoner Reentry, which is a community-based learning class where we do different community-based projects. One of the things I think that is important to recognize about young people now, or the students I'm teaching, is really there's so much more socially aware than I think, my era would have been, or lots of previous eras. They really are very aware and interested in sort of understanding sort of, a range of different human experiences, even if they haven't, experienced it themselves. Many of them have, I think just sort of a really highly motivated sort of social justice, perspective on things. Um, and then they're still shocked. I think sometimes probably for all of us when as you go about life, I feel sometimes less shocked by things, sometimes still, but in general, less shocked by things that are happening. Um, and they are stunned. And oftentimes we'll hear why did my high school teacher or history teacher never teach me any of this? Why haven't I heard any of this before? Why isn't somebody doing something about this? What can we do about this? Really, motivated in that way. And I think it just reflects, that it's some of it's access to information. And while we, lament, the access to fake information, these students are accessing all kinds of information all the time and sort of real humanizing ways. They always tell me you need to get on TikTok. And it's like, I'm not going to get on TikTok. I just can't process all of that information. I like to read standard sort of news kinds of things and read about the prison pieces, but they're watching videos, they're documentaries. I'm oftentimes being told about, different documentaries. So I think they're very engaged and in some ways, get sort of, there's sort of a diminished, way people talk about young people sometimes. And I think that's just, it's the way they talked about us. It's the way they talk. Older people are always like kids these days, right? I've always been really impressed by my students, and really, we're delving into AI times right now. And so we're doing a lot of work sort of around sort of false information and how to verify information, but they're all in on that, wanting to understand that and how that works. And, I'm very optimistic about this generation. When I see efforts to possibly, sort of not teach about certain topics or ban certain books, things like that, it really jumps out at me how often my students really feel and reflect on feeling betrayed by that. Like, "Oh, how come I wasn't taught this?" Um, and so and they go out and they teach people about what they're learning in class. So they go home at Thanksgiving and they have them all watch the 13th documentary, and they do things like, I think inform people. So one of my goals is to just help people think more deeply, and then also, know that they're going to go out and be out in the world doing, there'll be lawyers and doctors and nurses and teachers, and they'll have thought about these things that they often say, wow, I never really thought about it. And so I think that's part of what we're doing on a university level, and then on a community level, and engaging people with the community.
Yes, we have, I do some different things with circles of support. And each year, I always have somebody on a circle who's come to you, who's been in your class.
Oh,
And
good.
yes, and gone to a simulation or participated in some way, and who are looking to give back somehow, which is so hopeful. I think many of us have been browbeaten about the youngest generation, not the children, but the young adults, that the masculinity is on decline, and oh, all kinds of things, and that these kids aren't really involved. So it gives me a great deal of hope to see the young people that have come out of your class who care. I think that's the key, who care, you know. How did you come to be a forensic psychologist, Patty?
I came late to teaching, actually, so I'm not someone who had a long academic career. I did I guess I kind of accidentally got involved in doing this. I finished I was a 5-year, super senior, we call them, when when it was easier to like wait tables on State Street and put yourself through college. And it was my last semester, my senior year, that I thought, okay, I want to go on in clinical psychology. And I had like a almost a complete anthropology degree, almost a complete Spanish degree, and a complete psychology degree. And they said, you could combine your anthropology and Spanish and get a Latin American studies degree, which I did. And then I needed to get some experience because I was late to think about, doing the clinical psych route. So I started volunteering at the Domestic Abuse Intervention Services Project. Then it was over on Monroe Street at that point. Got involved in that whole issue, the women's movement at that point. And then did some work at the University Hospital for a year, did some research on a stress and coping cancer project. Really, really did not like working in the hospital. And I realized that, people that love and are great working in the hospitals say to me, how can you work in prisons? I'm like, how can you work in hospitals? I just felt like I realized I wanted something that had more of a social mission, and rather than just sort of the tragedy of being hit with some awful, illness. And so I traveled around a little bit in Latin America, and then I went to work on an educational farm in Michigan and got a job at a rape and domestic violence center in Pontiac, Michigan, sort of a rougher area, and decided to implement in women's prison trauma group, because at that point my whole focus was on doing trauma work, and not at all working with people that had perpetrated harm.
Yeah.
And then when I went to graduate school, I went to the University of Vermont, and you you prioritize a list of things that will help you, basically pay, waive your tuition, pay you some sort of, almost living wage. I thought I'm going to work in the Vermont Violent Offender Treatment Program, because that would be, I should have at least that exposure. And then I'm going to continue to work only with people who have been victims and survivors, but I'll have a exposure to the other side, right? People perpetrating. And I was lucky to get into a really progressive kind of program being run by someone who actually had was big in prison reform and doing therapeutic community work. And the more I worked with that population, I realized this, this is a highly traumatized group of people. And so my distinction between, the people that committed the offenses and the victims started to blur. And I started to think, if we could be more effective in treating these individuals, and intervening, then we would have fewer people that have been traumatized by these individuals. And so it was, I started to then work in graduate school with that population. None of my other graduate students I worked with wanted anything to do with that population. It was really interesting. And my dissertation was on factors that mediate the long-term impact of childhood sexual abuse. So I was looking still more on that continuum and focus. And I continued that actually in my private practice after I left trauma and PTSD, anxiety related work. But I just gradually started to do more and more forensic work. I got contracts with the Department of Corrections. I started working at Mendota Mental Health Institute part-time. I did a full internship at Mendota Mental Health Institute as part of my PhD. And I just I think it, gradually became my entire focus. I'd say like the last 20 years of my private practice was just exclusively forensic evaluations. And I was really interested in sort of getting people's stories in front of the court and having people recognize beyond just what the person did, whatever the crime or allegations were, or what, their history, who they were as a person, how this happened, and then how we could fix that, how we could, change that trajectory. So when they were released from prison or while they were in the community, they were less likely to go out and do that again. And so I was just I think I'm interested in people's stories, and I have hope that people can change, and that, thinking about ways we can, use our legal system, court system to try to facilitate that was really, interesting to me. And then the teaching came later, just sort of as a lark, and now I'm kind of doing that full time. I have been for a
Spreading the
number of
good
years.
news, right?
Yeah.
So how has restorative justice, has that taken hold at all in the courts?
I think it has. And one of the things that I'm really excited about, and it has a restorative justice component to it, is our drug treatment courts or other kind of mental health treatment courts, other kind of advanced treatment courts. Um, where you're working to help people change. And also part of that is, how can they go about making restitution,
Yes.
making amends for things. But there are a lot of treatment courts in Wisconsin that we've been evaluating as part of my community-based learning course that are just really inspiring. And so there's restorative justice efforts, there's treatment courts, there's, deferred prosecution options. There's a lot of things that are going on in the context of, a lot of punitive sort of, massive incarceration as well.
Hmm. You know, one of the things that Just Dane preaches and seems to be true is that just because you commit a criminal act doesn't make you a criminal. And of course that's kind of loosey-goosey in its implication, but and I'm sure you've seen the work that you've done, that so many of the people who commit a criminal act are people who have been abused or had something, in their lives that makes them less conscientious about the kinds of things that they're undertaking. We had you probably know James Morgan, um, when he spoke with us a number of years ago. He talked about being sexually abused as a young child, and that he thought that that was the way you showed love. Um, what a strange thought process, for those of us who haven't been involved in that situation. But it was an eye opener that so many of the people that are criminalized and untreated, because our system hasn't really come up to snuff on that. I'm delighted to hear you say that there are treatment courts. I only know of one. So um, in the rural areas too, it seems to be a large situation. So it's working.
I think so. I mean, it's not the full solution, obviously, but I think it is working. They're really quite inspiring to watch. We have one in Dane County. People can always go watch if they haven't. Judge Everett Mitchell on Thursday mornings. I think it's like 9:30 to 11:30. You can always go in and see those courts. We're doing one right now in Sparta, which is the whole Monroe County, 45,000 people. So that's a drug treatment court that has been really helpful. They have a large methamphetamine addiction problem, and that is associated with different kinds of criminal behavior. And, you can really see judges interacting with people in a really different way. And it's more, they've clearly, the first time I observed one, I was like, oh, the judge must have had motivational interviewing training. And they're like, oh yeah, we all do. And you could just see it. It was just a whole different way of communicating with people. So the one problem with the courts, a lot of the treatment courts, at least drug treatment courts, is they don't take anybody who has a violent history. And so you're sort of eliminating some of people that really maybe need your most intensive services. You also spoke to this issue of what doesn't happen in terms of treatment in prison settings, and I think that's there's some shifting with that now. We've got some more trauma work going on, but that's really new. I mean, really new, like within the last year or two, there are people have really trying to get trauma, evidence-based trauma treatment into the Chichita, the women's prison, into other facilities around the state, really new. And with one area I specialized in was evaluating a risk for people who committed sexual offenses. And one of the things that was really disturbing to me was that people were not receiving treatment. People that were really dangerous. Some people got referred, if you're a high enough risk, onto, the Sandridge Secure Treatment Center, which treats, people that are civilly committed, but they would have had very little treatment even in prison. And then most people were coming out untreated, or with the kind of treatment that nobody would really consider sufficient treatment. And so, and unhoused. I mean, if you think about sexual offending issues and people being released, oftentimes right onto the street, they can't get any housing. There's no place to live. They haven't been treated. It's just, I think it's something people don't really recognize as happening. But we had them for years, however many years we had them in prison, and we could have done something to reduce their risk. And we could also try to, not put them out on the streets without anything. So there was a great media coverage in Milwaukee. They did a lot of work around that where, they just followed this guy who, sounded pretty high risk based on his history, who is just walking the streets at night trying to get to a motel where he could charge his, electronic monitoring, one person just sleeping outside in a tent. It's all of the things you would not want for somebody that might commit a sexual offense. So I would love to see us continuing to focus more on getting resources into the system when we have somebody in the system, so we actually aren't just letting them out worse than they would be. The one most inspiring thing I think is happening within our Wisconsin prisons right now is this mass expansion of the prison education initiative. So I don't know if people have heard about that, but that's a really that's a wonderful thing. I teach intro psych out at Oak Hill for college credit, which is a prison about 20 miles outside of Madison. And it really makes a difference for people there and the research is so clear that much better actually than many therapy interventions to just help people get an education. And the more education they get, the lower the risk is that they'll end up back in the system. So I guess I also look for optimism and hope, and those are a couple things. Just Dane is one, the restorative justice interventions, treatment court, education, and also just the fact that people now are paying attention to that issue. It makes a very big difference.
I think the spectrum of sexual offenses is so broad that it's, you can say somebody who's been convicted lives two doors down from you, and it's somebody who was convicted of an offense when they were young, and they are far, far beyond that. And there's no way to clear people of that. And I think most people don't understand that sexual offenders who are released from prison wear a bracelet, or it's actually an ankle bracelet for life, and that they have to pay for it every month. They have to rent the damn thing. um, and they frequently malfunction. I mean, there are so many small issues around the
Mhm.
treatment that it's very hard, I think, to come up with a comprehensive way to support that kind of thing. It's hard to say to taxpayers, we want you to pay more taxes so that the terrible people that live in our community have to have to be watched more closely. And your experience of working with this population has got to be revelatory to the larger population and how we deal with criminal aspects of behavior in our population. Surprising, I look at all of us, um, middle-aged and older women, almost all of us white, who have no comprehension. Nothing touches us that would give us any kind of information about this population in our community. So it's so good to hear you say that it's recognized, and hopefully, these big cuts that have been coming through to the not-for-profit organizations aren't going to put this behind. But we've seen a change in police work as well, don't you think, Patty, where instead of calling the police for issues, they now can call, and I don't know what it's called, CARES, is that the group who work with mentally ill people or who can intervene in situations, um, beginning to make a difference. Instead of having more police, we have more trained people. Are you seeing that as well?
Um, I think that they're doing a much better job of sort of it used to be, and I can think about just something on my street that we saw a lot with somebody who had schizophrenia and was very paranoid. And it used to be they'd send the fire trucks and the, the ambulance, and then pretty soon it just all got down to just a care team that would come. And he mainly just needed people to go in if he left the house to make sure that nobody was in his house. He was and check the whole house with them and just sort of comfort him, and then he would go in almost like you might with the anybody that I guess that was very scared. And so yeah, I think there are a lot of ways to be smarter about money. And I do think as taxpayers, we waste a lot of money not dealing with the issues most of us are concerned about. We spend a lot of money not housing people, and providing sort of, day treatment or the kind of shelter systems that are, we need, but are not really going to be, successful in the long term, helping families and kids stabilize, those kinds of things. I feel like we spend a lot of money with people while they're in prison. And then as soon as we let them out, we have no money for them. So if we spent, $30,000 a year just getting them some housing, those kinds of things, we would be in better shape. So sort of really being smarter about how we use our resources would be something that I know my students think about. They do, the projects about, and I think is a really important thing to think about, that we could do better with even the same amount of resources. We have these pockets, I think, of money where it's like this is a state pocket, and then this is a county pocket, and then this is a city pocket or a town pocket. And so it's sort of, if we just looked at the money that went into people being incarcerated and we said, okay, if half of these people are going to be back in within a couple years, what if we took that money and gave them even, a third of it to try to, do support services for them out in the community? What could we do to, save everybody money? So it's sometimes the fact that it's, the way it's set up, I think is, something we could reimagine, I think, even without more money.
That's wild. That's great. That's great to hear. As a matter of fact, it's so good to hear your positive attitude towards many of the problems that seem never to go away, that there are ways to approach them. Um, Unfortunately, it all has to come through government, right? Uh, so, but again, I'm what I've seen with people who graduate out of your program, and who stay in town and who find places to work where money isn't the most important thing in their career, but being responsible to the community is is to me one of the most hopeful things. And I love the fact that you've been able to explain or express that kind of hopefulness in what we'll say the youth, because that isn't what we hear. That isn't what we hear about kids today. We hear that they've been damaged because of COVID. We hear that they don't know how to be social. We hear that they are turned inside and lonely and depressed. And so to see your class when I participate and see these kids actively participating, and yes, some of them having fun doing it, but that it's a very positive reaction. It gives me a lot of hope, and I think all of us need to hear that every now and then, Patty. So it's great to have you here. Can you give us anything else that you think we ought to know about our youth? I keep saying our youth, our young adults.
Always reminds me of that show, the movie Cousin Vinny, the Utes he always talks about. Um, so, one thing that I mean, I think some of those things you're talking about are true. I don't know if they're, people, the loneliness, the disconnection, the social media stuff. I see people, you know, um, getting better in that area. I think COVID did throw a lot of people and isolated a lot of people. And then, I really did work on sort of social skill kinds of basic kinds of things with my classes. But one thing that surprises me, and for anybody that has young people or young adults in their lives, it maybe isn't surprising, but they do not want to make phone calls. And so when I'm thinking, well, you can call this person. They're like, what? No. And I'm like, here's how you make a phone call. And I thought about it even with my own kids. It's like once they had their own phones, we weren't teaching phone manners, right? Because they're not answering our phone. And so their ability to sort of do that, I think is one of the things I work on with them, in my community, not in my bigger class, but in my smaller capstone class. It's just outside of their frame of reference that you would do that. And it's sort of, and then it's just, they're scared. How do I call people I don't know? What do I say? We work on the script of
Oh,
that.
goodness.
So, and we all sort of grew up doing that. And it's not, oftentimes would prefer to just talk to someone rather than, go back and forth with emails and all of
Yeah.
those things, but they do not want to do that.
Well,
So,
that explains my adult grandchildren who never return my phone calls. Uh, that the only way I can communicate with them is via text. Um,
yes.
that works, but otherwise, yeah, they don't talk on the phone. But one generation earlier, that was the method. We all had our phones and could talk to people all the time. Not so much anymore. That's amazing. So thanks for doing that for us. Can I send
Well,
kids to your class?
one small ripple at a time, I'm trying
Yes,
to.
for sure. And I'm very aware that you have a class to teach at 11, and I promised you that we wouldn't take more than 45 minutes of your time. So you have about 4 more minutes to talk to us.
Does anybody have any questions that I could answer or?
Sue,
On here.
Sue,
Yeah, I'm interested in this capstone group you have doing community-based projects. What kind of things are they
We're
involved in?
Well, this semester we're evaluating a juvenile detention program up in Sheboygan County. We're evaluating, it's a second part of an evaluation of the Monroe County Drug Treatment Court. They have to do evaluations every, 5 years. So we're doing that as a class, learning how to do that for them. Sheboygan County is interested in understanding sort of the cycling in of people that are in their detention program and sort of concerned about the fact that they seem to have more people in their coming into their detention program and than other counties might. So we're sort of evaluating that and assessing that just in terms of the numbers, as well as talking to the kids up there and staff and sort of what are some of your ideas for some things that could be improved. And then that goes to the county organization that works around justice related kinds of issues. And we're working with Grow Academy, which is a program for kids coming out of Lincoln Hills School. It's out sort of by the Oregon Correctional Facility, Oak Hill Correctional Facility. It's out in that area. And they're doing a mentoring project where they bring the kids and staff actually, because the staff oftentimes haven't had this experience too, onto campus, UW-Madison campus, and tour the facilities and, get a sense of, what's going on the college campus, and they see the Chazen and the dairy barn and the poultry and the ice cream and the all of those things. So trying to bring the idea that they could go to college and that also this is a public university and they're welcome on campus too. So we do different projects based on things that are kind of identified by community partners. And so my goal with that is to get people out into the community.
Yeah,
A lot of
yeah.
times people have not volunteered anywhere before. They're nervous about that. They haven't worked with people that have been impacted by the legal system at all, and they're getting a chance to sort of do that and also sort of realize, oh, we know things that other people don't know. And as students, rather than just, sending a paper to me, which I grade and then, they throw over their shoulder when they graduate. How can you give this information or use your knowledge in psychology to actually do something for the community? And that they don't have the resources to do. So yeah, it's been a really fun class to teach and sort of design. So
I love the idea
Yeah,
that
yeah.
giving students the opportunity to have responsibility in their community, because I think so many kids graduate and they're off without responsibility back to the community. Yeah,
yes.
it's great. Well, Patty, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's hard for you with your schedule, but you took the time to join us this morning and I appreciate it. I learned a lot and
Yeah.
Well, I
I'm
appreciate that you're all doing this. So it's a wonderful thing that another form of community, right?
absolutely, absolutely. So thank you so much. And
All right.
perhaps some of the people who are here today will see you next semester at the simulation. So
That
thanks.
would be wonderful.
It'd be
Okay,
great.
take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Wasn't she interesting?
Oh, very, very. Yeah, that is